right, so I think when I think about work, and I think this is historic, we bought this book by an economist I don't remember the name of, but work has always been about three things, really. It's been about service, right? Service. It's been about value, an exchange of value. I give you something, you give me something back. And it's been about satisfaction. And in order to deliver those things, we do need our bodies, we need our brains, and we need our hearts. And if we really get it right, what we also get is our spirit. Our spirit really comes to life. You know, we become the healers, the doctors, the teachers, the coders, whatever it might be. It all works. But then there's also times when these parts disconnect. And this is something I want to talk to you about because I'm fascinated by what happens when heart and mind disconnect for the individual, for their health, and for productivity and for organizations. So when things disconnect, and I'm sure you probably have found yourself sometimes in this situation, we're not happy. We're really not happy. What we are is anxious, really anxious, because there's a part in our brain called the insula that's really paying attention to how we feel inside. And we can't cheat this thing. Okay, I promise not to swear. So we can't cheat it, but we know it's not right. And what it's doing is it's actually sort of driving the fear response of going, oh crap, I'm not okay, right? So that tends to not work in our favor. But on the opposite side, when those four parts really align very well, we're content. We're at ease, we're really approachable and happy. And what's interesting is we get an internal feeling of going, it's good. We get contentment, we get happiness, and it doesn't take all that much. And what I hear a lot, and I don't know whether you hear this too, is that people say that talent is in short supply. And I'm going to be provocative to say I disagree. I actually think what's in short supply is whole, connected people. There are, on every statistic, more and more, from small kids to teenagers to university students, people that are not whole. And that, I think, is a problem, because those are the people we're going to get at work. And when I say whole and flourishing, I'm using Corey Key's definition of flourishing, which is actually a person who's social, psychologically, emotionally well. That means that your brain works fine, you're not worrying and being anxious, you know, you're at peace, you're not in conflict, your body's not letting you down, and things are groovy. So future of work, for me, is about helping to focus on how human beings flourish and how we get this integration to happen. Where by integration, I do mean the sort of unity of those parts. And I think, like Mo was saying, when we get contentment in the sort of Eastern traditions, that's really what we get. For me, future of work is more integrated humans. Not through technology, but actually through something I will explain. And I'm a neuroscientist. I'm, of course, you probably won't find it surprising, an integration pioneer. So that's what I really study and get fascinated about. And I also run a small startup called Make Time Count. And we're interested in helping every person, irrespective of their starting point, to actually really thrive. And what I mean by this is to be productive on a holistic sort of way that is really lasting, okay, where people don't burn out. So I'm sure you've seen this sort of image before, perhaps not as an alligator, but you've probably seen it in another form of a human being with a cold stare and a very reptilian kind of predatory approach. Because this exists, we've evolutionarily inherited it. But we've also inherited a much more caring, altruistic, and socially bonded type of brain through our mammalian heritage. And equally to this sort of evolutionary bit, when it comes to what happens inside of how the brain actually connects, it is all happening through experience, okay? So neurons don't actually all connect together and come pre-wired. It is the experience we have that actually shapes what the heck is going to happen in the brain. And so let me show you this, because I think this is such an important point, because it is the safe relationship that shapes a good nervous system, nothing else. So if you look at those main brain parts, the brainstem, you know, quite reptilian, helping us with our homeostasis, the midbrain and the cortex, during safe behaviors, we get the right balance. Imagine it's like an orchestra. Everybody's playing, but everybody's playing in a synchrony, right? But what happens when we are fearful? What happens is actually we get a lot of imbalance. The amygdala starts to get active, but there is no cortical way of shutting it down. And so the system starts flooding and flooding with fear and worry. And I'm sure you've been there, because it is actually helpful to our survival. We've been built that way. But nature's also given us something else. It's given us like a natural valve of protection, and it's called attachment. What happens is that as we attach, as we feel safe, when we feel fearful, we actually go back into a nice, calm state. And this is a natural loop that should work incredibly well, and does work for some people, but not all. And when it doesn't work in a really big way. So I'm going to skip this slide because I find it extremely scary. And I'll go on to the next one, which I think you'll find a bit relevant also. This is actually a triangle framework from a psychologist from Germany, but I find it so useful for helping to explain people in the workplace about what happens to us under different states. What I'm showing you here is effectively 3 different types of selves. A self that's been traumatized or potentially wounded, a self that survived that trauma or that experience, and a healthy self. And as you can imagine, in the workplace, we'll find people all across this triangle. And what's interesting too is that their physiology will be incredibly different, their facial expressions will be different, the way they're going to be speaking will be different, and even their eye gaze will be different in terms of vertical and horizontal direction. So this is actually really telling that these experiences can have a lasting effect on us, and they're really difficult. So because of what I told you so far, which is that safety really matters for helping us get out of trouble, for helping to sort of restore when we're scared, in my opinion, removing connection from the workplace, removing heart, is the craziest, stupidest thing you'd ever do. Okay? It's not what we should be doing, because it's actually not how we work. And we know this because of developmental neurobiology, but also psychology, which is much older and predates neuroscientists. And what happens to kids? Kids come primed for learning. They come with open eyes and they want to absorb things. The brain is looking to connect. The brain is looking to actually learn to relate. Relating comes first. If you learn how to relate, you can learn everything else. So, if you look at children who don't get that, what you actually find is not just that their IQs are lower, let's say, but actually they have no skill of knowing how to connect with each other. They can't learn again very well. They never feel safe, and that is a permanent scar. Now, of course, as we get older, the stuff in our nervous system doesn't change. Our neurobiology remains the same, so why would we think that in a workplace we're any different? We all want to feel safe, we all want to thrive, we all want to feel good, and that's really important. And yet that's not always the case. So I wanted to share a personal story. And I resisted, I promise you, not to name names. I thought, oh, this is so cool. I've come across a few of these bad bosses and a few other people who haven't been that terribly nice. And they have made me feel unsafe, dehumanized, devalued, wasted, and even threatened on occasion. And what I noticed in myself during this time is that my heart and mind certainly split. So the heart went really small and was like, I can't care about these people, they're mean, okay? And what happened to my brain is it moved away from solving real problems to trying to solve, why are those people like that? Which wasn't really helpful. Well, and that, put me into the survivor mode. Equally, however, I've been very blessed, and there are some angels here as well, for people who have given me something else. They've given me safety, affirmation, inclusion. They've given me criticism, but it was helpful criticism. It was a sort of criticism we give people when we really want them to do well. And that's allowed me to feel, hell yeah, this is great. And it allowed me to flourish. And I have applied that as a change agent in organizations to trying to help other people do the same. So if you see, this is an average performance curve of poor and outstanding performance in the middle. And the stress and anxiety levels, there are no X and Y axis on this, by the way, but the stress and anxiety levels are really high for poor performers because for good reasons in a way, and also for really outstanding performers that I know a lot of because I tend to work with quite a few of them. But in reality, when you look, HR is often wrong. There are far more poor performers than we actually think there are. They're just hiding quite well. And this is actually really problematic. And in terms of stress, the high performers are often far more stressed than poor performers. And we don't really tend to look at this very carefully. But what I've done is I went to an experiment where I proposed to my boss at the time that what we should do is actually apply a far more holistic and human-centric approach to how we're going to develop people. And by doing this, we've been able to shift the performance curve of people at all stages. So whether they were really great, whether they were middle, or whether they had what we call a derailment. It was fine. But what's even more interesting is we reduce the stress level of those people completely across the range. In fact, actually, the only stress peak is sort of when you're climbing up towards a better performance because it's kind of normal, you're working. And this effect was not only lasting through time, but also repeatable in different countries. So that's kind of how I've been keeping myself busy. And I think the difference in approach has to do with a change in focus. I moved away from the focus on a goal, and I put the focus completely on the person. So the people who came to see me, they said to me, my wife has just had a bad diagnosis and I'm really scared for her. We talked about that and we worked on that. And they were like, are you a therapist? I guess so. We talked about a lot of what Mo was saying before. So I think my learning from this is that when people feel safe, they're no longer hijacked by fear. And then their performance is fine, because actually we're all learning creatures. If we don't know the answer, we go find it. But if we're trapped, it's not happening. So I call this the triple benefit, because what I've seen is that the individual improves if you put attention on the individual. But what's really interesting is their team improves as well, and so does the brand, because more people want to come and work in the place that actually cares about people. And this isn't a line, this isn't something you put on a wall, this is the way you actually live and practice and show up to work. So there is a lot about what one has to really get one's head around. But if people leave, this is actually not a bad thing, because we're improving the larger system of organization. So a person who leaves with these sorts of values becomes a change agent for everyone else. And that actually is quite nice, because more people tend to come behind them. It's a generative way of working, and I think every person becomes a change agent. One of the nicest things for me, sort of 10 years on from the initial project, is to see some of the alumni become those sorts of managers, those sorts of leaders, and seeing them develop whole cadres of other people. And that's very satisfying. I just want to quickly show you what happens when you get someone who's not okay, right? Because that begs the question of what happens then. And I think here's a cartoon of what happens. If they join a very sad place, well, you can just imagine that's not very good. If they join a sort of mixed place, they tend to associate with the people who are already not great. And that's to do with cognitive bias. We tend to sort of go towards the people that we naturally gravitate to. If they come to a place that is really out of sync with how they are, they of course leave too, because it's hard to fit in. But here's something wonderful that happens when you get transformative leadership. If you come into a place where people actually care about you, you have a chance to actually fit in and become okay and actually have potential. So I think in the future of work, we have to really start focusing on flourishing humans being far more than the absence of poor performance or ill health. It's almost like putting the microscope or the telescope in a completely different place. And I think if we do that with heart and mind, we're able to, given the neurobiology that we've got and the plasticity and all the wiring that is just natural, we're able to do what effectively call, teach an old dog new tricks. I think that's something that is definitely worth doing, because we certainly need more positive people, but not just positive smiley, but actually positive and really okay for all sorts of jobs. So I want to end with some of my most recent work, which includes places where there are more than even one Nobel Prize. And here I'm looking at people who are actually in various different levels of this neurosafety. and at the same time I'm looking at where they're paying attention, okay? And there are 5 very problematic trends that I have seen that I think again make the case why we should really have a heart and mind approach. The first is that if you have a high pioneer or a trendsetter or someone who's developed such a high level of capacity and they're very free to do anything they like, what they often find is that everyone else in the organization looks more fearful, not less fearful, more fearful. So actually they have less people to play with, which isn't really fun. And people tend to complain and they say, oh, we don't have smart people around. And actually that isn't really true. But then something interesting happens to that middle curve, the safe people. Because with this polarity, what tends to happen is that those people then freeze. And that's not good either. And if you already are in deep fear that you're not doing well enough for whatever reason, you start to mask it. So you're spending all of your energy on trying to pretend you're fine when actually you're not fine. And you're getting sicker. And that's really not so good. And then eventually, when the top performers occasionally derail, which I can tell you happens for all sorts of reasons, there is no culture to actually care for them either. And that really means that there's nothing there. So I think I want to propose that we adopt an African saying, which I think is a really wise proverb. If you want to go, fast, go alone. But if you want to go really far, you got to start to go with other people and you got to start to care about other people. I think the future of work is work that's designed with neurobiology in mind, with neurobiology of safety and curiosity, because as I hopefully have demonstrated to you, when we get the safety right, the curiosity will start to develop anyways quite naturally. We should start to nurture what we want to have. If we want to have humans, we should be designing for that. Otherwise, we'll end up with machines. And I think that is actually a scary, scary prospect. So I would say we want safe, but not complacent. We want resilient, but not problematic. We want capable, but not threatening to oneself or to others. And basically, we need that because I really think that there are huge problems we have to solve. Problems that are really worth getting crazy about. Climate, conflict that's eating up the world, and inequality. And those problems actually really need all the hearts and minds we can put together. So I wanted to kind of give you and just end with sort of 5 practices that I think are really worth doing. The first one is to make more time for personal development and self-discovery. I think the more time you spend on trying to understand your own heart, your own mind, your own body, the more capacity you have for understanding other people and knowing that they might be in a different place to you. We also have so much complexity in systems. Every time I work with people, it's more important IT and systems, but we've forgotten the human being. We've forgotten the person who can't cope with 10 screens because they don't have 10 computers open on their desk. We also need to be thinking about empathy and compassion in terms of conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is often thought from a very egocentric point of view. I win, you lose. I'm right, you're wrong. It's the wrong way to be going about it. And I think we'll have to develop skills with managers and leaders for how to manage neurodiversity. Because ultimately, people come in different shapes and sizes, and their nervous system does as well. And we have to know how to not waste the talent and potential that we actually have. And finally, we do need to develop leaders who do look after the welfare of others. I can tell you that the ones who have looked after and helped my career have been oddities. And I think they're not the norm, they are the exceptions. And they're fantastic heroes that I want to celebrate every day. So my last invitation to you all for today, and I think this is so key, is that we should all be really asking ourselves 2 questions far more often. I would even say every morning and every evening. What is it that I truly need? Because actually asking that question is really key to centering in on yourself and addressing what you need in that moment. And how can I help things go well for everyone? And that is all I have, ladies and gentlemen. These are lovely people whose images we've used. And you can reach me at this address. And I do reply to my own email within 24 hours. So thank you very much.